and my co-host Levi Rowland. This is Season 2, Episode 8. Tonight's subject is going to be on witchcraft and folk magic. We're going to discuss the differences, histories, similarities, and how we incorporate them into our lives. We also want to give you a chance to ask us any questions. You may join us, if you're brave enough, by calling in. The number is on a sticky note that is not visible. What did you do? There you go. 504-321-3472. We ask that you keep the questions to a minimum, like 2. Actually, if you call in, you can ask 3 or 4 questions because no one ever calls in. But
ask away.
You're welcome to. Or you can type your questions in the chat and we'll be happy to answer them. Any questions on the subject of witchcraft or Alexandrian witchcraft are perfectly welcome. But tonight's subject is on folk magic. Now for show and tell, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the event that I'm engaging in this weekend because I didn't really promote it a whole lot because I don't even promote my book most of the time. I'm a horrible promoter, which is why I married one that's good. But we're doing Witch Fest this weekend, which is traditionally out of New York. And we've gone to Witch Fest before, and I love the witches of New York. I actually really like New York.
Oh, same.
It's not really a place I would have ever thought I liked, but it's one of my favorite places in America. I don't know if I'd want to live there, but I really love visiting, and I love New Yorkers, or at least the ones I know. And I love the witches of New York. And in fact, what most people don't know is witchcraft had its beginning origins in the United States in New York.
Yep.
So it was first brought here by Rosemary and Raymond Buckland through their initiation with Gerald Gardner and Lady Olwen, Monique Wilson. And I always or is it Monique Wilson? I always get that mixed
Monique,
up.
I think.
Yeah, Monique Wilson. Because we call her Lady Olwen over here. It's just always been a thing. None of the other ones are called by their craft names usually. So I definitely think that that's forgotten, but there is a deep history in New York, and magic and witchcraft is still continuing. So this year, because of COVID-19, it's been taken online. So if you haven't yet bought your tickets, you can go to witchfest.org. They've also posted the New York Witches Parade on YouTube. Chris and I and many of our friends were a part of that. That's actually run by Lady Rhea. And we were invited to take part in that, but it's always been in collaboration with the event. So I'm not quite sure of the financials of the event, but I'm pretty sure if you pay for it, you can go and you can, just like at Hexfest, you can watch probably any of the things. I don't know if they save them or not. Sorry, but my classes are at 2:00 tomorrow, and then 3-ish, 4-ish Sunday, and then we are doing panels at 8 p.m. CT tonight and tomorrow, but I'm obviously not going to be on the one tonight. So that's about what I know. But it's got some wonderful presenters, and I encourage you to support the event if you don't have anything else going on.
Love it.
So your turn.
Yes. So we usually do a card, and that's often what my show and tell is because I forget to do
You're
show
lazy.
and tell. I am lazy. But I have to do the
make
reading.
something up like I've been reading the Quran.
I have been, by the way, and I can explain that at a later date about why I did. So today's deck is not a tarot deck. If anyone knows me, knows that I desperately try sometimes to wrangle cartomancy away from the tarot supremacy. But this is a Lenormand deck called the Rana George. It's based on
an Arabic-looking Lenormand deck.
It's based on Moorish architecture.
Actually, I love it.
Me too. But it's also because it reminds me of when we were in Sintra, Portugal, because the architecture there is the same.
Well, because it was Muslim at one point.
Yes, it was part of the Cordoba Caliphate, in Grenada and whatnot, which I actually read a very good book recently set in that time period. But this is the deck. The reason I love it so much is it's gilded with Hamzas, or the Hand of Fatima, depending on what you call it. It's an ancient, symbol in the Middle East.
At the time, would it have been still considered Persian architecture?
No,
it was different.
Persian is Iran, and some of the Stan countries. That's where you see Persian.
Because the reason I was wondering is that you get in Malta had the Phoenicians, which they're a break off from.
The Phoenicians are older.
Yeah,
because Persia goes.
They're a break off from the.
Persia goes to you have a lot of different cultures in Persia, like from the early Zoroastrian culture, and then eventually Islamic and stuff like that. But yeah, this is a beautiful deck. It's all gilded inside and outside. So front and back of the cards are gilded. Lots of Islamic Moorish images, but it's very like I said, that Cordoba, Granada, Portugal, Spanish kind of image, which I really like. Now, Lenormand, as I've said before, is not usually read by a single card. You read them in triplicates usually or in some other grouping, but we're going to pull a single card today. So give it a cut.
Just one card.
Just the one. It's God's will. During COVID, I've started saying that about everything. Somebody be like, I'm sorry, we're out of that type of soda. God's will. The ring. It's a very beautiful image. The ring, which in a playing card deck would be the Ace of Clubs. The ring is commitment, marriage.
That card's for you.
Why do you do this to me?
Because I'm already married.
But yeah, it's a good
Still working on whether I want to do the commitment thing or not, but I've got the rings. Right?
Okay, beautiful. But a good card to remember our commitments even in a time of uncertainty. How about we go with that? That sounds poetic, right?
Yes.
Even in a time of uncertainty, remember your commitments.
That's why I think, in following with older traditions like the Persians and Muslims, harems. Let's bring back harems.
You're a big fan of that idea, aren't you?
Because it gives you more options every day.
I disagree. I'm a prude. Anyway.
I'm not.
So tonight, and hello, I see all of our comments. It's nice to see all of you. Blessed be Kevin, Christine, great to see you. Elohim, everybody else.
Everyone. Hello.
Thank you for your wonderful comments. We're happy to be here too. So folk magic, Brian.
Folk magic. So
of the people, folk.
Yes, that's basically I think there's a lot of confusion about this nowadays because it actually it can be diverse, but essentially the idea of folk magic comes from the study of folklore and studying, magical practices that can be found within what we call folklore. Mm-hmm. And, essentially what are the folk? What are, it's the magic of the people, essentially put, it's what we might call peasant magic, because it was the magic that you would just find in the people. And it was a lot of times very oral, and we all grew up with it. We all grew up with things. I mean, blowing out your birthday candles, for instance, that's folk magic, and you're brought up with wishing on a star, blowing out your candles,
Horseshoes by the door.
Some things that might be called superstition still fall into folk magic. Throwing salt over your shoulder, whatever it's going to be, knocking on wood. These are all coming from magical superstitions or sometimes magical practices that have come up through every culture. Mm-hmm. And although it's diverse because it can come up in different cultures and have certain cultural influences, for instance, there's a difference between Irish folk magic and Italian folk magic or Hispanic folk magic. However, there are also some commonalities that you find in every type of folk magic.
Yep. Groups of threes, money being good luck, bad luck if you break a mirror. You find that in lots of cultures.
Another aspect that is pretty common is it's what they could get, which usually comes from the land. So you get a lot of stones, plants, animals, things that anyone could obtain locally. And it'll be a little bit different based on the fact that, what's local. But why a horseshoe? Because the people who developed horseshoes had horses and they shoed them. And it was made out of iron and something developed out of it. It became symbolic. It wasn't nowadays where you just go buy yourself a horseshoe or something.
There was a lot of work that went into it. My dad was a farrier.
Being here in New Orleans, and other places where you use coffin nails and things like that, or railroad spikes. These were things available to the people who first started using them. When you get into Irish folklore or folk magic, it might be about, the fairies stealing the luck from your butter. Well, they were making their butter.
Butter was very important.
It was
like the taste of butter.
So it was something that was really in tune to their lives and their culture. So we get some diversity, and there's a lot that goes into it in the sense that there are things that were passed on through family superstitions, family beliefs, cultural superstitions, cultural beliefs. An enormous amount was preserved through the Catholic Church or people who practice Catholicism.
Yeah, the cult of the saints
in
is
various,
a huge source of folk magic.
Being an Irish Catholic used to mean blending. You get the same thing. I've talked about it before. I grew up with a Native American family. I didn't grow up with them, but I grew up with them in the neighborhood. And they were the only Catholics I knew when I was very young. And you don't hear, I love this story because you don't hear much about it. And I'm actually still friends with the girls now. And so, we can still kind of talk about it. You hear about it with Italians, you hear about it with Irish people, you see it with Mexicans or Hispanic people, right?
Yeah, you do.
But you don't really see it with Native Americans. They literally had a Mary statue in their living room that had eagle feathers, corn, an eagle claw hanging off this Mary statue.
It's the continuation.
Now, I've got no idea what that really meant to them to this day, but it wasn't your average thing hanging off the Mary statue. It was very strange looking to a child, and I knew it had something to do with their Native American heritage. And there was some association being made.
Yeah, they carry on tradition.
With that, and other saints and things like that in their house. So there was a blending because, and you wouldn't think this happened, but the reservations were often controlled by the Catholic Church at one point in time. In fact, her father was very anti-Catholic. Her father was very anti-Catholic because he actually grew up in one of those boys' homes where he was beat for speaking Native. Like that was a living memory for him. They weren't allowed to speak Native. And we think, that sounds like it's a really long time ago.
It's not.
It really wasn't. So, whereas her mother was, raised Catholic and not beat. So there was kind of a crossover. But as time went on, they got more into their Native American spirituality and less into the Catholicism. But it kind of always sort of was there in a sort of way. So they had their own practices that were blending, but they thought of their religion as being Catholicism for a while at least. The world's changed a lot. So I think that a lot of times you get people now who will talk about folk magic or these practices in their family, and they want to associate it with their religious identity. I don't think that's really a new thing, but it's not witchcraft.
I think it's a super new thing, actually. Like, that was never a thing. Like,
no, I don't think it was a new thing.
No, what I mean is, I'm agreeing with you. Like, historically, people practiced folk magic, but they would never consider themselves not Christian.
Oh, yes.
That's what I mean.
Yes,
they
were
were
changed in the sense that people have started now trying to make it about some sort of pagan identity.
Exactly. And historically, I don't.
Sorry, I misunderstood you.
I don't think they would have done that historically.
No, they usually blended it with Christianity, and it depended on whether they were Catholics or Protestants. You do get some, very few folk magic practices that have been retained, where you can see the old gods coming through.
Yeah.
One of them was in my book where they lock and the old Norse god names.
Well, it's the
thrice for lock.
Yes.
Like, yeah,
and the 9 arms charm.
Yeah,
still uses Odin's name and everything. Like
they do come through occasionally, and occasionally you even get dear old Satan coming through.
You do. Dear old Satan, what a friend.
So there definitely are fairies and old gods and things like that did survive in some charms, but almost always it's Christian or Catholic.
They even do like their magic in the name of the Trinity. I mean, that's the entire Grimoire tradition. The entire one is Christian, is Christianized or Hebraicized if it's Jewish.
So Levi, since I took such a long rant, I'm just going to parlay into a question for you.
Ask away.
What do you think is the difference, in your opinion, between witchcraft and folk magic?
Witchcraft is inherently religious. So folk magic is a process. Like there's two things I think are super important for understanding magic. Historically, if we're talking about sort of what the difference between movements are, one of them is that magic was a part of the world before the Enlightenment. And what I mean by that is people do not realize that at one point, magic was literally real. Like, there was no concept of it being, like, psychological or a process. The whole world believed in it. Before the age of the Enlightenment, it was a magical world, right? So natural magic, causal magic, correspondence-based magic. Everyone believed this, from the highest, most educated echelons to the poorest peasant. Like, nobody questioned it. There were no Democritus, maybe, historically, but you're gonna have to fish to find it. So there was no difference. The whole world was magical. It was all religious. It was all spiritual. There was no concept outside of that except in very tiny circles. So when it starts to differentiate is when you start having people no longer believe in the spirit behind the work, and the work becomes superstitious. Like, it loses some sense of divinity. Even the word divination has the word divinity in it. It was always divine. And witchcraft, I think, is inherently divine. I think, now, infernal, historically from the church's perspective, from the Sabbath mythology, but it was always religious, right? So folk magic could be practiced by everyone. It was simply things that, like Brian said, were passed down, mixing of different traditions. It was a belief in causal magic. Like if I do X, Y will happen. It was a belief in correspondences. This root looks like a blood vessel, so it will cure bleeding, like blood root and all that in herbalism, correspondence-based herbalism. But witchcraft was always, whenever it was brought up in the church's documents, a contract, right, between you and a familiar spirit, but which we would interpret as the gods, they would interpret as the devil or the fae or the queen of the east or whatever. But it was always religious. And I think folk magic is sometimes evacuated from any deeper philosophical meaning because it's lost contact with its original source, whereas witchcraft did not. Witchcraft in its modern incarnation and its, the modern initiatory lines still holds contracts with the gods. We still hold a religious lineage, whereas folk magic is sort of just a belief in a causal magic in the world.
Well, there's two ways of looking at it. One, I've discussed it many, many times that there's really three historical definitions that you can use for witchcraft. There's kind of four. There's the Old English witch, which all we know about that, witche, is that they could be male or female, and that they worked magic.
Yep.
And that they existed in the minds of Old English people.
Wise people, cunning people.
We don't know much else about them. So that's sort of a subgroup. But the other one is obviously that witches were, according to the church, either working with some sort of fairy agency, demonic agency, or old god like Diana, last goddess of the pagans. That's church records. So we've got that and the trial records that support those same sorts of ideas. Yep. And then, of course, you have the anthropological definition, which was defined by white Christian men in the 1930s who were a part of the colonial machine, who were going around the world and using an English word to describe any form of magic. And that basically would mean witchcraft and magic are the same thing. Or what's that guy in the hut doing? He's a witch doctor. What's that? Ooh, that's witchcraft. Spooky, spooky. And they created that narrative. It's not very old. And then, of course, you have the modern resurrection of the witch cult from, the 1930s to the 1950s, heralded by Gerald Gardner. So those are really the definitions. Today's modern magical occult movement still follows those definitions. They just don't always know where they came from.
Yep.
Historically, however, prior to the 1930s, witchcraft was always associated separately from magic. It was never considered the crime of magic. That was not what made you a witch. It was considered a heresy.
You weren't going to get burned for folk magic.
You might get a slap on the wrist. You might have to, say penance. Sometimes it'd be completely ignored if it was Catholic enough.
You're not going to the pyre, though.
No, that was not the crime of witchcraft. The crime of witchcraft was a heresy. It was for selling your soul to the devil or for working in some way that was contrary to the church.
Sedition against the
heresy.
Church and the state. Yeah.
So there's no old definition of witchcraft just being magic. So folk magic is a kind of magic that witches can do. And in fact, I think almost all witches do or have.
Oh, yeah.
It's part of every culture. But it is a separate thing. It's not the same thing, And of course, there are folk magicians or people who do folk magic who identify as witches and do not consider themselves religious at all. That is a thing that exists now. However, it's something that's a modern construct, a very modern construct, And of course, we're not here discussing the labels, but when we look at folklore or folk magic, it predates the modern occult revival. There's actually quite a lot of work and books that have been compiled on the history and practice of folk magic throughout the world. So if you're interested in that, great. But it'll always be the same thing. Get that root, get that bark, get that.
That's what I wanted to say. Is like folk magic is often not interested. This is not always true, and this is going to sound like a read, but it's not. Folk magic is not really interested in the philosophy of why something works.
It's not occultism.
It's not occultism. It's not It's not Marsilio Ficino in the 15th century trying
Carry
to knit
the
together
rabbit's
a philosophy.
foot with you, and you'll have good luck.
Exactly. Right.
Simple as that.
And it's really correspondence based in a lot of systems. Like, I'm not kidding. And, historically, it literally was the root of this plant looks like a blood vessel, so it must cure bleeding.
I've got a few questions once you're ready. I've got to do that last one first.
Oh, I was going to take that one, but you can't.
Hi, Billy. No, that's not true. There's no historic evidence or current evidence of Diana having all-female worshippers. There is a modern religious sect started by Zen Budapest that is called Dianic Witchcraft, and that is a lesbian-oriented female priestesshood, but it's the goddess Diana has been affiliated with every other branch of witchcraft and has a historic presence. In fact, historically has had many priests in various parts of the world. Now, her Greek counterpart, Artemis, has some historic evidence of a stronger priestesshood, but there's no evidence of it being all female or lesbian.
No.
There was the Isle of Lesbos.
That is Susanna Budapest's religion, Dianic Wicca. That is what Brian's talking about. That's really where that comes from, is the concept. And there's also another branch of Dianic Wicca called McFarland Wicca, or the McFarland Dianic tradition, which comes from Texas, which does allow men.
When did you call me a member of the Von Trapp children?
On some show.
Oh.
I said the young, our new member of the...
This must have been the last time I had
Yeah, somebody was asking if I called Brian a Von Trapp child, and I did in a previous video when he dyed his hair blonde. But no, the other thing about priesthood, just real quick because this is off topic, but historically it was true in the Greek-speaking world and in Rome too, that not always true, but it tended to be true that priests and priestesses were the gender of the god they were serving. So the priestesses of Hera were women, the priests of Zeus were men. But there are exceptions to this, such as the Rex Namarensis, which is somewhat historical and somewhat mythological, but very important, and it was always man.
And maybe witchcraft.
Right? So you do, it depends, basically, but there is no... It's not breaking down completely like that. So Luke has a great question that I think we should address because it will open up a new conversation about superstition, which is folk magic basically superstitious magic?
Well, I mean, any kind of magic in the hands of the superstitious is superstitious magic. Any magic in the hands of a trained occultist is something else, because I can guarantee you someone who's trained in some sort of form of magic can take anything and make it work. And I think that's the truth. I don't think that folk magic comes just from superstition. However, if you're the average person who's seeking magic and you're not really a trained practitioner in it, you just want something to help you win at the slots or to get your love life. And all of those people are approaching magic in a sort of praying or being superstitious. If I have this lucky item, this is going to happen for me. They are working from an amount of superstition. Now, I'm not saying that can't generate power, because it can.
Belief is powerful.
So the answer is yes and no. I think it survived sometimes in the realms of what academia would call superstition.
But I think folk magic can sometimes also be preserved lore and preserved attempts at understanding the world. So, for example, let's say that a certain herbalism lore is scientifically true. Like, for example, there are certain coagulants, in nature or whatever that might stop a free bleeder or whatever. And so folklore has preserved that because they just knew it worked, right? So that's another thing that folk magic does. It's not just about belief. It was about maintaining certain truths in the culture that could help a tribe, help a people. So this root cures this disease, or this chewing on willow bark gets rid of your headache. Well, that's true. Chewing on wintergreen will do it too, because it has the same properties as aspirin. These are truths. Don't take that into account because there's some, whether or not that's healthy or not, it's a whole different thing. But those were just true. There's chemicals in them.
He wasn't prescribing it.
No, I'm not prescribing it. But I'm saying willow bark and things like that. Those are folk magic too, but it's also just reality. And so folk magic is often just a vehicle to contain wisdom, that was passed down throughout the ages.
Folk tradition. Twisting Ways was asking about cunning folk. A lot of cunning folk were Christians. Now, sometimes they were accused of witchcraft and sometimes they weren't, but they did exist. They did exist as their own vehicle, and there are people that still practice that today.
Yeah.
But it's, generally speaking, historically, they've been associated with witchcraft. However, there are some cases where they did work with the fairies. Call a spade a spade. It's probably the eye of the beholder, right?
Exactly. Yeah. To the church, they were probably witches.
Some of them, not all of them. Yeah. It depended.
The church
and the areas. Yeah. In some places, the church was more lenient than others. When you had...
It wasn't nearly as bad in England, for example.
When you had local priests or, clergy who grew up with the fairies and superstitions and things like that, they weren't looking to oppress their local populace with those things, and often fostered it as, well, yes, but that's really Saint so-and-so, or yes, you're right, but that's really Mary,
it's another thing that we forget, that Brian talks about how we forget what the world was like a lot, and that's so true.
We also don't know. We don't know more than what we know.
Until the Counter-Reformation, when you had the Counter-Reformation, which was, people don't realize how massively influential the Counter-Reformation was on the Catholic faith. Once the Reformation happened, and then we started the Council of Trent and all these other things, the Catholic Church realized that it had a major problem, which is that its clergy was uneducated. There were enormous amounts of priests who could not quote the entire scripture, who could not read Latin very well, who could only really say the Mass in bits and pieces, who were not educated in theology, who were still preaching heresies from the pulpit based on old folkloric concepts of God. They had a massive issue. It took an entire council, it took an entire sort of church movement to eradicate this. So Brian's right. The local priests probably believed the same things as the people they were preaching to.
Well, we know books that were recorded, like the Mabinogi, were recorded by Catholic monks. There's a lot of information that we had that was retained by the church or collected by members of clergy independently, and that's true throughout the world. We often want to, I think in modern occultism, a lot of people want to, rail against the church. We're not Christian. So in that sense, a lot of us have also had bad experiences.
Yeah.
And we look at the past, but, for as much bad as it did, sometimes it was also the only source of education. So, there were people in it that preserved the very things that we hold valuable today, including a lot of this folklore. Somebody had to write it down. Some of it was passed on orally, obviously. Some of it was created as time went on. But some of it has been recorded. There's an Irish book that's extremely important, and for some reason it's just completely escaped me. I want to say her name was Goodwin or something like that. But I can't remember.
I'm blanking.
I've forgotten more than I've ever learned, really. But there have been some great books that have been recorded that we have still.
So there was another one that kind of ties into this, with interesting way of saying, what's the difference between a fairy doctor and a witch? So what I would like to address right now, names varied across cultures. So you had cunning men and women in England. You had fairy doctors.
Nobody wanted to be called a witch.
Nobody wanted to be called a witch. This is what is complicated.
You got killed for that.
You got killed for that. If you read the Episcopal canons of the Catholic Church, or the recommendations for confession and penance that existed in the church from the time period of the witch persecutions, if you were caught practicing horoscopes or folk magic, or they even talk about in Irish and British sort of text about tying strings to fairy trees in hopes of getting a lover or whatever, this was not witchcraft. They were not going to burn you for it. Some of the penances could be quite stern. It could be 40 days on bread and water. It could be requiring pilgrimage to a holy site to be forgiven, but they were not going to burn you. Witchcraft is different. Witchcraft is when they thought you had went so far that you had sold your soul to the devil. And it didn't matter if it was Diana. It didn't matter if it was a fairy. It didn't matter if it was a vision. That's the devil in the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. It's all the devil. So that's where it went to a different place. If they thought you were worshiping a foreign power and you were gaining your power from a foreign allegiance.
Now, twisting ways, is it remotely possible that there were people who secretly reveled in that terminology? I think probably so, but you wouldn't want to be called out on it. Doesn't mean I think that there was a giant secret society this whole time, but
no.
But I think it's also I think it would also be naive of us, or it is naive of us, to think that whether it was a lunatic or a wealthy fringe or a small community, that no one was doing it in the whole world. This was a phenomenon. This was a mythology that everyone knew about. Of course, even if they were just making it up, I think there were people that were doing it.
Absolutely.
Maybe just based on what was publicized, you're supposed to go, do this in a graveyard, or you're supposed to go meet in the woods and do this. Oh, without a doubt, somebody was doing it. I think it would be highly illogical to think whether it was just kids, who knows? I think we want to convince ourselves that we know, and we just don't, because there was this wonderful thing called the Dark Ages, and most of Europe went illiterate with the Black Death. There's a wonderful book called How the Irish Saved History, and it actually describes, because most people don't know this, how illiterate almost all of Europe became. And it was actually through few Irish monks that a lot of culture was reintroduced back into Europe, because they didn't they didn't die. We've lost a lot, we're just now, for some people, discovering things like the people we would call classically educated, in the city of Alexandria. They knew the world was round. They knew the planets, moved. They understood these things. And then we lost it, and we were educated as children that they all thought the world was flat.
Not true.
And it's not true. It's called, we lost all that ancient education. We lost and there's still so much we don't know. So I think the modern assumption that we know all these things and it's all made up, there's nothing new under the sun. Labels have changed, and they've had some consistency. But yeah, I do think that there actually were things going bump in the night.
I would go even farther. Like, I agree with Brian, but I would go even further than that, which is that, like, I went to the University of Tennessee, and when I was there was a huge, like, for some reason, you know how universities get really good departments in certain things because they attract certain professors or whatever. But our university had a huge medieval history department, and most modern historians, like, if you read a really good book on medieval history now, they don't believe in the Dark Ages. Like, there was no Renaissance. That's not a thing in a lot of historian books anymore. It's just not a thing. The worst persecutions, where we were throwing people out of windows and burning people by the hundreds, happened during what most people would call the Renaissance, not the Middle Ages. So, like, the worst witch persecutions in Germany, where they were burning people against the walls of castles and stuff. The worst illiteracy, the worst cruelty, the worst cases.
It's just shifted into Protestants and Catholics.
Exactly, exactly. So, like, the Middle Ages also had the Carolingian Renaissance and Alfred the Great in England. So I think Brian's right. Is like this sort of this mythology that it was just a bunch of idiots and they didn't know anything and it was all superstition. It's not true. They had access to a lot of stuff, especially after the Crusades, when we started bringing in through the Islamic caliphates or whatever, the Platonic texts and whatnot. The oldest copy of the Emerald Tablet we have is in Arabic, and it was preserved in the Islamic world and brought through, Europe, and then finally becomes massively influential under the Medicis, with people like Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola and whatever. Like, this stuff existed, and Brian's right. This idea that nobody knew about the Greeks, nobody knew about the gods, they were all a bunch of illiterate peasants, like, tying knots in the woods or whatever, it's just not true. You had huge, huge groups of people who knew about the pagan gods, who knew about Plato. Like,
I also think
and the Kabbalah, like, it's all there.
People don't think about the wealthy. I think it was very politically motivated to be like, oh yes, we're all converting to Christianity. These were the people that had access to Plato. These were the people that had access to the grimoires. These were the people who could actually study a lot of the stuff that we're still studying today that's driving the occult. These are the people who brought the occult back into the world, literally.
Yep.
And modern witchcraft was brought to the world through the occult. It didn't come out of folklore. It wasn't some book about, blowing on dandelions to make wishes that was heralding witchcraft. It came out of the modern occult movement. Mm-hmm. There's just no doubt about that. And I think that we came out of that and then tried to crawl back in the cave and make believe.
Part of that is also we're Americans, and America, even if regardless of the percentages of who believes what in this country, we're a deeply Protestant by nature country. And so, like, we forget that, like, the Protestants were philosophically in many places very different. They did not like, most Protestant theologians did not like Plato. They did not like Neoplatonism. They were Aristotelian. They did not really like the sort of Catholic occultism that had taken over Europe. You get a few people who are very mystical, like Jakob Böhme in Germany or whatever, but in reality, they were trying to cut that out of Christianity and make it very black and white, very Calvinist, very Lutheran. So we've forgotten a lot. Whereas Europe kept it. Catholic Europe never really got rid of the Fae. It never really got rid of the old gods. It never got rid of the old sort of Platonic belief that everything was one and correspondences and the chain of being and all that. It was always there. It just, if you're poor and you didn't read a lot, it was going to manifest itself as folk magic. The belief is probably from an older concept, but they might not have
some of it, if you study it, some of it very much does ring to having an older belief, there's very few pieces, but they do exist. And some people really, really spend their whole... I mean, you never hear of a wealthy or famous folklorist, but there are people who actually spend exuberant amount of times really studying these things.
Oh, God, yeah.
So we're not denouncing it. In fact, in some ways, what we would call religious witchcraft of the past, and even religious witchcraft now, does cling to some of this folklore. It is something that's carried on, and it's traditions of the land, and it's usually herbs that are local, spirits that are local, things that are local that are being used, and that's something that has been carried forward by the common people, and that's something you would get passed on in poorer communities, agricultural communities. You'd also probably get a lot of the same thing you get with other cultures. If you study, like we said, the Native Americans, or you go to Hispanic countries, or if you look at the ATRs and how no matter where they're from, they all tend to blend the Catholic saints and what have you with their local deities. Definitely happened in Ireland. Look at Saint Brigid. There's no doubt that she was a goddess.
Saint Lucy.
There's tons of them like that, and the people just sort of blended them together and kept using them. When I went to Ireland, the biggest eye-opener is outside of Athens. I'd say it's probably the most goddess-oriented land I've ever been to. All you saw were statues of Mary. Hardly ever holding baby Jesus. It was always just statues of Mary. I never saw just a statue of Jesus. I saw one St. Patrick statue the entire time I was there. Other than that, it was the Virgin Mary or Brigid. Everywhere. I'm not saying inside the churches they weren't there.
Yeah,
but, on roadsides and shrines, it really, really was ringing true. This is like a living, breathing reincarnation of something going on there. So what Levi and I are basically stating witchcraft to be is, obviously we believe that the modern construct of it absolutely has an historic older tie. There's many, many examples of the divine feminine and old gods being in connection with what the church recorded, twisted as it may be sometimes. Sometimes they actually straight up used the pagan names early on.
Yeah.
It wasn't till much later that it just became the devil, So that exists, as well as just common sense, the blending and the weaving. If you go and if you study the early Christianity, you study early Judaism, you'll see a blend with those beliefs and the Greco-Roman Hellenistic beliefs early on. You'll see that they would correspond angels and demons to the Greco-Roman daimons, which in their philosophy were any spirits that were not men or gods. So anything from angels to demons, they were all conflated together. So you'd see this early identification, and it was through time that it began to change and become more like how we see today, where there's a polarized division, and the old ways were locked out. Early Christians often stated that the old gods were demons. Like it was recorded, Aphrodite was a demon,
Astarte, Ashtoreth and all that.
That sort of, some of that's theorized. The Astra things are theorized. But not to correct my brilliant friend here. I know the theory. I think sometimes it goes too far in some people's minds. But off the subject, there is a weaving. So what we're saying is any form of magic, whether it's folk magic or planetary magic or whatever, is not necessarily always inherently religious. It always has a religious tie originally, though. All magic comes from religion. There's no historic record of atheistic practitioners of magic. It really wasn't a thing. Early shamans weren't really like atheistic.
Not in the modern sense of believing in a materialist universe, no.
No, they had some sort of divine connection, whether it was working with totems, working with the dead. It may not have been the way we work, but they had some sort of divine connection.
Yes.
I've never read a study in any kind of anthropological paper that said, well, they didn't believe in anything, really.
David Rank? No, it's Skinner. Skinner's book on Solomonic magic. He has a section where he...
Oh, well, that's a bit different.
He's talking about the definition of magic in general, and he basically talks about historically, there was no concept of magic that was not a contract with familiar spirits or gods.
Of course
it's just not a thing.
It came from magical religion.
If you read the grimoires, if you read the folk magic, there is no sort of reference to it. So Sapphire asked one up here, though, that I want to touch on, which is Appalachian magic, because I am from Appalachia, and
he's actually telling the truth.
It's a hot topic right now, that it's like the cradle of folk magic in America, right? Because I'll say a couple of things about this. Number one, it's true. Like, Appalachia is full.
Did I ever tell you my
magic.
granny was a witcher woman from Appalachia?
Yeah, but the thing that drives me crazy is, like, for example, you're using the term granny magic, and that's really popular right now. I'm from Eastern Tennessee and Eastern Kentucky. My family has been in Eastern Kentucky since before this was a country. Like, my family has been there since the very dawn of it, after, Boone and whatnot. It is my heritage. Like, when I took the DNA thing on Ancestry, it literally pegged me as early settlers of Appalachia. I've never heard the term granny magic growing up my entire life, anywhere in Appalachia. And I'm going to say something a little ugly here, which is all the people that I see writing about Appalachian folk magic right now are from cities. They're from large cities in Appalachia, and they're from the foothills of Appalachia. They're not from where my family's from, Johnson County, Kentucky, where
do the accent.
Loretta,
do
no,
the accent.
Where Loretta
I can't get him
from.
to do it. I still don't know what it sounds
so
like.
And I really despise.
Could you do it?
I really despise when it's called hoodoo. Hoodoo is an African American term. So, like, when people say that Appalachian magic is hoodoo, that's not true. Hoodoo is an African American spirituality that was not just in Appalachia, it was all over the South. And actually, most people in Appalachia who were white would never use the term hoodoo. I think there's a weird mixing there that's a little racist and makes me uncomfortable. But Appalachian magic is very complicated, but folk magic really did survive there. They still call people witches. They called them witchers, water witchers. There's a ton of folk magic there. My grandparents all did it. My great-grandparents all did it. But they never would have called themselves a witch. They never would have used the term magic. They were devout United Baptists and Free Will Baptists. They were usually deacons or deacons' wives. They never, ever in a million years would have called it magic or witchcraft, ever. You pointed at one.
I don't remember now.
This one?
Well, I've never been invited to the Bohemian Grove ritual. I don't know. I've seen things on it. I don't really know if I have an opinion because it's hard to say. There are lots of secret societies. There are lots of things that look like secret societies because a lot of fraternity activities look very much like secret societies. So, it could be a secret society. It could be just some sort of fun fraternal thing. It's obviously something set aside for politicians and wealthy people. There is some history to the fact that there really are secret societies that existed that today we may not think of as being that big of a deal. But at one point in time, for instance, Freemasonry was kind of a big deal, like an extremely big deal. And your most wealthy people in Europe were involved in it. And in fact, it had something to do with the French Revolution, may have had something to do with the American Revolution. It was a very strong organization that has very obscure origins. I did write a little bit about it in my book, Initiation into Witchcraft, because Gerald Gardner was a Master Mason, along with practically every other member of the occult. Here you have a secret society that's initiatory and has a level of mysticism to it. And unless you're actually a direct initiate of it, you can't really say you know what it is. Because we, as witches, as initiatory witches, we can tell you that. The world always thinks, well, we know everything. We've read all the books. It's all out there. If you haven't actually gone through your 3 degrees of initiation in Alexandrian witchcraft, you don't have a shot at completely knowing it. And that goes for anything else, I think. We might have ideas, some things may have leaked, but we do not know. So I find that Masonry to be a very curious element in modern occultism, but it was far from the only thing. The OTO actually has pre-German origins before Crowley ever got his hands on it. I still want to say Crowley, it's a Western thing. Before Crowley ever got his hands on it, there are many, many orders, some that we know nothing about. There's the mysterious Hellfire Club. People sometimes talk like it was extremely nefarious. Some people say it was just a fun place to have parties. We don't know.
I hope it was crazy.
We don't know.
I hope so.
We know certain things. And those are the ones we know about. I can almost certainly guarantee you there are more we've never heard of. And I think that, that's the story of the occult. The story of the occult is you have all these secret societies and initiatory traditions. It is the same story as the ancient mystery schools and priesthoods. It is no different. And it actually follows the same patterns of where you had Eleusis, interacting with the cult of Dionysus, and you had them interacting with the cults in Alexandria, and then you had the cults of Isis and Serapis coming and interacting with the cult at Delphi, and et cetera, on and onward. There's just more we don't know than what we do know. But what we do know is that that's not folk magic, and folk magic is something that was usually carried on by the people. It wasn't something that was some hidden thing. It wasn't something that was some secret thing. It was a part of our everyday lives. It still is a part of our everyday lives. It's not some oogie boogie secret, dark secret,
Well, Alex made a good point. He says, I've noticed a lot of people are quick to claim folk magic practice that stems from their immediate family as a way to gain magical credibility without any credibility. And we have a lot of other comments of like, my grandma lit candles, my grandma read tea leaves, kind of like my comment about my grandparents did all kinds of crazy shit in Appalachia. Yes, that doesn't mean anything. And it's not a lineage. It's not a history. It's literally just folk magical practices that existed. They considered themselves Christian. They were not part of anything, I will say masonry is oddly popular in Eastern Kentucky for some reason, but that's neither here nor there.
It used to be popular everywhere.
I mean, it's a weird connection with
the United Baptist Church. It's not as popular as it was.
But the point being that Alex is
right.
Me
and Levi wanted to be Masons, and then we found out they don't really have orgies, so we decided...
I would never participate. I'm a prude. But also, I don't want to be a part of anything that doesn't allow women
sorry. He's got a boyfriend now. He's got to pretend.
I am very prudish, actually. But I also don't like any organization that doesn't let women in.
Patrick did tell me that about you.
What a joy this has been. Good night, everybody. No, but I really like
I'm having a go at him, Patrick. Forgive me.
You're fine. I like all these comments because it is a personal pet peeve of mine. It's a massive pet peeve of just this whole like, I love when people are like, I'm doing what my ancestors wanted me to do when they're like white people from the middle of Minnesota. And I'm like, your Lutheran ancestors would be rolling over in their grave if they knew what you were doing. Like, spare me. Like, just because your aunt one time said something like, if you carry a nickel, a man will marry you on a Wednesday. We're all witches. We've been worshiping the devil since 1642. No, you've not, honey. They were Lutherans and they hate what you're doing and they were probably racist. Like, it's like, stop pretending that you have some sort of like mysterious lineage to the grandpast.
I remember
I hate that.
Val telling me a story, and I don't want to misquote her, but it went something like this. My grandmother, I think it was her grandmother, my grandmother used to teach us you could buy... or they used to teach us, someone in her family used to teach us that you could buy warts off people with pennies. Did that make them witches, Brian? No. No. She wouldn't in a million years. Oh, yes, me and my sister used to leave fairy offerings. In fact, my sister would say, give them £5. They really like £5. And then we'd get a little ways down the road. She'd go, I've got to go back for something.
We should go take the money.
It didn't dawn on me forever that she was the one getting the £5. These customs are magical, and magic is magic, and I do think that most folk magic has its origins in the cultural magic, and that's what makes it wonderful, is a great way to explore individual cultures, because I don't believe witchcraft is any culture other than maybe British, which is a salad bowl of cultures. See, I'm learning. Salad bowl. It's even got the trans in there.
I'm going to go. It's been lovely.
Hey, I said it all right.
You did.
Got the non-binary salad dressing right on top.
You're right about one thing, though, and all these comments are too. It's just... Here's what I think is happening, and so I'll be a little bit nicer, even though I really want to be mean. Like, I really want to be mean about this hereditary bullshit, but I'll be a little, I'll be a little nicer.
Because it usually
it is garbage.
It is. I've never, honestly, in all my years in the craft, the only hereditary witches I've ever met that I believed were modern hereditary witches.
Yes.
Meaning that their parents or their grandparents had entered into the craft in the real craft in this time frame, or some sect of paganism in this time frame. But in my belief, that doesn't make you any more of anything than any other religion. I don't really believe you're Catholic because it's in your blood.
No, you're Catholic if you're baptized and confirmed.
Exactly.
As a Catholic, period.
So
you're not in the church if you're not baptized.
It's an easy way to create a fantasy. Yes. And let's call a spade a spade. Some of the people that traverse our magical communities are either imbalanced or nuts. and some of them are just delusional.
That's not wrong.
And some of them want to play, D&D in real life. I'm not saying everyone, but we've all met them, so that's where a lot of that comes from. Or just used to be a way to pull the wool over people's eyes and make money.
It's desire for validation is what it is. When people leave Christianity, when people, when people leave the mainstream religions, they feel invalidated and they desperately need to cling to something that makes them feel special. So I'm not angry at them necessarily for doing it. It doesn't make you a bad person, but this claiming that folk magic in your family makes you some sort of lineaged witch or whatever, or your grandmother was a witch or your it's always a grandmother for some reason. I think
Alex might have started.
Alex started it, right? But I don't think that I understand.
It's our fault. It's the Alexandrians. Blame the Alexandrians.
I see why they're doing it. This is another...
and that's a funny thing. In fact... although most of us don't believe Alex was initiated Gardnerian, it was a different time when occultists used to pull the wool over the public's eyes. In fact, it's not actually unfounded. There are times when you've got hidden initiates or stuff like that you do have to lie. If Levi was a hidden initiate and someone said, is he really a witch? I would say, no.
Yeah, we don't.
We don't. Or make some story up. I would lie because that's my oath to protect him is stronger than, we're honest people. But I think it used to be, with people like Crowley or Alex modeling himself or different cultists used to feel like they were just pulling the wool over the public's eye. It was a bit more showmanship. And today, because of Christianity and financial scams and things like that, because I'll tell you one thing, Alexander's never made very much money off of witchcraft.
No, he did not.
He served the craft as a priest. He didn't ever write a book that he published and made money off of, really. He had the Alexander lectures, which he didn't make any money off those. In fact, I hate to be mean because I know some people I know liked him, but Herman Slater stole those from him and sold them through his publication in America because it was a mail order thing. He used to use it for milk money. He really did. He wasn't doing it to make money or to. And his witches knew the truth, and that's a story that was going on there. But his grandmother, there is some interesting things about his family, and it does seem she may have actually practiced folk magic, but the soup was very much colored.
So I'm going to be real brutal here because Tina asked a question that I think goes to the heart of what I think I've beat around the bush, and I'm going to be a little bit more forthright because Tina asked how many generations would you need to go back if a family practiced a particular type of witchcraft in order to call oneself a hereditary witch. I don't think there is such a thing.
I don't either.
That's a made-up thing.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
It's a made-up thing.
What it actually comes from was the idea when the craft was first coming back into the public world, this idea that the tradition and religion of witchcraft may have carried on in certain families. And in fact, when you read the theories, it was often stated that it was very wealthy families, including the royal family, was
very conspiratorial.
Called out. Yes. But that the idea that it would have been carried on, might have been carried on by certain families in the sense that they were teaching it within their family. It's become this sort of like we're hobgoblins and you're magically a witch because this is bewitched and it's all in the family. No, witchcraft is a religion. You have to become a member of it just like with any other religion.
Yeah.
The means of conversion or the means of initiation might vary depending on whose version you're entering into. In our branch of the craft, it would require initiation. I also concede now that I think people can practice the religion of witchcraft without necessarily being initiates. I think there's a variation there. It's not the same thing, nor does it entitle them to come into my circle. But I acknowledge that it exists because of the way this has kind of gotten out there and people have grabbed onto it.
Yeah, cat's out of the bag.
And I also am aware that there's lots of people all over the world who would get in it, believe in hereditary witches.
Yeah. And also, here's what I'm going to say is why does it matter? This obsession with my ancestors is no way to sort of color this anymore as colorful stories or family legend or whatever. It's literally just a lie.
There are people in witchcraft.
It's just not honest.
Who have told the general public that I'm poking at a bear here, but that their ancestors served as priests and priestesses on the slopes of Mount Etna. There's no way you could even know that. That would be like if I told you my ancestors served at Stonehenge. There's no record of what was going on.
No, you're making
most
it
of
up.
This period.
You're making it up.
We know that most of us are related to Christians, anyone in the West, whether they were Catholics, Protestants, or both in most cases. Eventually, we were all related to pre-Christians. So if that's your, badge of honor, we're all genetic witches then, because we all come from pre-Christian people.
But Phoebe says...
all of our ancestors worshipped the old gods at one point in time.
So Phoebe's disagreeing with me, and she's saying, not true, the gift is in the DNA and teaching in the family. I'm going to say something
What gift?
What gift, first of all? If you're talking about psychism and magical ability, that's universal. And second of all, I'm going to be really mean here. Not mean, I'm going to be honest. Be very careful with this. Because this has been a part of the occult tradition for a long time. Every single time that it has become a thing, it has went wrong. Whether it was Blavatsky talking about the root races, which ended up being a whole racist cosmology, whether it was the SS getting obsessed with occult traditions and Aryan bloodlines or whatever, this never goes well. And it has historically always turned into nothing more than racism and tribalism. And the fact that we are still doing this in the occult community, this still it's in the DNA, magical blood,
well, it would be in everyone's DNA.
It's ridiculous. It's so dangerous. And it's not true. And it has always went haywire. When you get a group of white occultists together who start talking about the magic in their blood, I guarantee you it's going to go south real quick. It always has. It always will. If you make this about DNA and blood, you're going to get weird.
Well, anyone who thinks that they're just naturally have all this information is being delusional. That's just a case in point. There was something I was going to respond to. Yes, this one here. Gina, here's a couple things. And I think this is it's kind of a bit off topic, but that's okay. We said you could ask anything. So, covens, and we sort of talked about this a little bit in our last episode. Number one, have you ever been in a real one? Meaning one with an initiatory lineage. Because if you haven't, you don't know whether you'd like it or not. Two, you could say you don't like being in groups of religious people, or you don't like being in groups of people. So if you choose to practice alone for whatever reason, then you don't need anyone. So I say this, and this is me being mean. The only thing I don't like about solitary witches is they're not solitary enough. Now, the reason I say that isn't really to be cruel. It's because I'm pointing out the fact that by the very nature of you watching this, you do want some human interaction. You do want to learn. You do want to hear opinions. You may even want to express your own. It may just be your comfort level is a bit off, or you don't trust, or perhaps because of previous experiences, usually Christianity, the intimacy of spirituality with other human beings isn't something you want to take the risk on. That's all perfectly okay. No one has to be initiated. No one has to be in a coven. That is a vocation and a commitment. And, we like to see that taken extremely seriously. So most people shouldn't be in a coven. Most people shouldn't be initiated, because it's actually quite dangerous to be initiated. And it can have severe repercussions because you're asking for something very powerful.
Yeah.
Now, I say if you want to worship the old gods and you want to worship magic and you like doing it on yourself, all the power to you. I think you can practice the religion of witchcraft as a solitary. However, I think one has to be very careful about, I don't need initiation. I don't like being in covens. I don't, getting that sort of defensive persona, I think expresses a vulnerability that I don't think is really necessary. And I think it's where a lot of the strife comes from. I think a lot of people who aren't initiated for whatever reason think that people that are initiated think they should be. We don't.
No.
More people I meet, I don't think should be initiated.
Agreed.
Obviously, we're speaking to the general public, so we realize we're going to educate and impact people who are never going to get initiated because we don't convert. Witches do not convert. Mm-mm. So that's not our goal either. So what are we doing here? We are actually spreading the love because we do actually, I believe anyway, that the manifestation of the craft and the god and the goddess does want to go beyond the bounds of initiation. But initiation and that priesthood is the source of the very beginning and the continuation in the end, in my opinion and heart.
Yes. And I want to address, like, I'm getting some pushback, and I get it in the comments, but I'm going to say I'm not going to relent on this. If you get a group of white people historically together in the Western world and they start talking about their DNA and their bloodline, it does not end well.
No, Hitler did that.
And they all did.
Yeah.
Like, it does not end well. Whether it's Blavatsky's racism, it does not go in
practice. Gardnerian and Alexandrian witchcraft. We believe in reincarnation. No, it's not a Celtic religion. It's not. So if you're going on that, gods are the oldest gods in the world, and they belong to all human, different forms and cultures and priesthoods. So to us, the idea of hanging on to your flesh in one life doesn't really hold any weight, because I have a feeling I've been every color of the rainbow.
So we did have one I really liked from Frank. Are folk magic practices used within the Alexandrian system of magic today, or is folk magic only practiced by individual Alexandrian initiates in private?
Alexandrians practice all kinds of magic. Witchcraft is a scavenger religion. We use what works. Now, I think to the chagrin of even some initiates, witchcraft does have its own system of magic unto itself that is taught within the craft. However, and particularly in Alexandrian, we explore all kinds of magic. So folk magic is definitely something the Gardnerians do, and it's something we do, as well as other forms of magic. But, in Alexandrian witchcraft, we do planetary magic, we do angelics, we do the Kabbalah, we experiment with different things.
Yeah.
However, the craft that Gardnerians and Alexandrians practice also have a system of magic within that occult system unto itself. If that makes any sense. But yes, we do. I'm not someone who consciously performs folk magic to this day. It comes up sometimes, I leave offerings to the fairies. Levi says that's folk magic. I don't.
It is.
I think he's wrong.
It's not a bad thing.
The fairies are real.
Didn't say they weren't.
Anyway, I'm having some fun. But yes, I think most of us have our things. But it's, folk magic is not so much a system, but a set of practices.
Yeah, and it's what people had.
That can be really simple. It might be just a couple things, or it might be a lot of things.
So, for example,
and it depends on the culture. Sometimes it's more complex.
In hoodoo, for example, you'll see a lot of usage historically in the South of the 6th and 7th books of Moses, which were grimoires, and it's because it was popular. It was available. In England, you see a lot of influence from Barrett's the Magus, the Magus, which was a very popular and easily accessible grimoire. This is the same with the Black Pullet and all these other famous grimoires. People worked with what they had, and so folk magic is often what was available. It was what people could get their hands on, and so that's sort of whatever became dominant and easily accessible in the area would contribute to folk magic.
Do you know what I have noticed? And this will kind of be something that we can relate to, because I don't think you've ever had this much pushback before, have you?
A little, yeah.
We're stepping on other toes right now, which is hilarious to me, because folk magic really was brought back by the craft. It really was. It is only recently, in the public spotlight, it's only recently, I think, hoodoo and conjure have become really big. And the fact that we live in the capital of that for the country, which we really do. It's like Salem is the capital of witchcraft in the United States.
Hoodoo actually wasn't big here. It was a Catholic city.
But it is now.
It is now, yeah.
Yes, of course it wasn't then. No, it wasn't. But, and Levi knows a bit more about it than me. Of course I do, because I have friends and what have you. To me, it's folk magic, whether you want to call it African or Southern. I don't know, depending on when, where, who, why. But it's definitely culturally influenced separately than what would happen. I think here in New Orleans, we do get a mixture of the African, the other people that lived here, even the Choctaw Indians. Somebody was saying they're Choctaw. That was the Native American tribe that lived here. And we know they intermarried with the slaves here. I'm not an expert, but I know that part's true.
Yeah. I want to say something so bad, but I'm being so good right now. I'm being so good.
If he's being...
You know what? Screw it. I'm going to say it anyway. I'm going to say this. The same people who feel this desperate need to make their white heritage sound so important and want to steal the thunder from black people and black voices in the hoodoo community and the magical community right now are the same racist people who think the Beatles invented rock and roll. Get over it. Like, all you're trying to do is steal some sort of heritage that is not yours. And it's just cheap.
I thought Elvis invented rock and roll.
He didn't either. They all stole it from black people.
I'm teasing.
It drives me insane.
I live in New Orleans.
All this is just this desperate attempt. Black people cannot do anything in this country without a bunch of white people trying to steal it. And this resurgence of black folk in America trying desperately to connect to something that was a source of power and a source of magic in their community. And now it's just a damn sea of white people that's come out to try to take it, just like they always do. Take a step back, kiddos.
Really strange things I noticed when I moved to New Orleans is everyone I met who was into voodoo was white. We've gone off the rails.
I know, it's so ridiculous.
And we're not saying that's bad. I mean, from our periphery, they could have been black in a past life. I don't know.
Yeah, but irrelevant right now.
But that's not their belief system, is it? So
take a step back. Know your place.
I mean, as a witch, like I said, I personally don't like. It's not that I shouldn't say culture. I don't like ethnic faiths. I'm fine with cultural faiths. The only time that I sort of secede that is if you are actually tribal. Like, if you're a part of some sort of tribal people that still has a living culture today, well, that's a bit different because it's
absolutely
so rare and so unique that you kind of have to embrace that. But when your ethnicity has gone to the imperial level, you're done.
Yeah, it's a little weird.
It's like,
it's a little weird.
We didn't there. We were the Roman Empire.
You know what it is? There's a scene in the movie Milk, about where he becomes a gay rights activist, but he's not been on the scene for a long time. And there's a quote that I think applies to a lot of things where this guy says, "We're like the Catholic Church, honey. We accept converts, but we don't make them Pope the same day." You know what I mean? So, like, all these people who have started...
should give that to new initiates.
Exactly.
As a t-shirt.
We don't make them Pope the same day. So all these people getting involved in, black folk magic and, and the spirituality going on in black circles in America right now, that's cool. Great. But know your place and know whose voice needs to be dominant right now. And if you don't think it does, then you maybe need to have a conversation with yourself.
Now, here's a whole new fun subject that I'm going to switch it back to folk magic for a bit. Because I had this thought earlier when we were talking about doing this. I thought... where do I see really the most exposure of folk magic? Levi and I actually admire folk magic, especially the things that and we should talk about that. Well, actually, let's do that for a quick second before I get into my thing. Don't let me forget it, though. So what kind of folk magic have I done throughout my life? Well, I already mentioned birthday candles. I don't know where the hell that came from, but it's a form of folk magic. We also did horseshoes. I once did a horseshoe spell where and I don't know where I got it from, you had to write down what every desire was and stick them in the notches throughout the horseshoe and then hang it up. And I now have every desire that I put in that horseshoe. It took a really long time. But maybe that horseshoe is responsible for my whole destiny. So who knows? Because I had all my dreams. I wanted a rich husband. I wanted my own store. I wanted to write a book. The fact that
you are the only person I know who just blatantly says this, like, it's no big deal. Like, it's so amazing.
My theme song was Madonna's Material Girl, and that is not a lie.
God in hell.
Any of my early girls.
She looks
now.
Bad,
then I proceeded. Yeah, now finally she's finally gone too far.
It's bad.
She's gone too far.
It's bad.
You look Asian.
Don't look at. Stop doing that.
In a bad way.
Stop looking at the Twitter. It's bad. It's bad.
No, it's children. Really bad. Anyway,
somebody help her.
Getting off. It's too late. But for a long time it was fine.
It was fine for a while, and then when it went. Like,
yeah, it could maybe it'll loosen up.
It went
pretty soon. Yeah. You made me totally lose my track.
Folk magic practices that you do.
Well, anyway,
the horseshoe got you a rich husband.
I'm not
what
really.
Else?
Eventually, I dated a long stream of very poor men first. But it all came true, but took a really long time. But I remembered that folk spell. Also, just like weird talismans. At one point in time, when I was really young, like a young teenager, I used to wear a crab claw around my neck all the time as a talisman, which is really weird, honestly. But
wow. Okay, we're sharing.
So I've done my share. It's not really my
own a Red Lobster.
It's not my way of working magic now so much, but sometimes I incorporate it.
Yeah.
But it's in our lives. I think children start doing folk magic. I really
absolutely.
do. That's You know, and it's a great way to teach children about magic. You know, children are probably the best folk magicians because they don't really need a system.
Yeah. Folk magic I've practiced, I like...
I don't know if it smelled or not.
Somebody asked him if his crab claw smelled.
I don't know. I don't remember.
Like I said, I still think it's sad that you didn't end up owning like a Red Lobster chain. I think that would have been a magical story.
I don't even know how I got it. Someone may have gave
Cheddar
it
Bay biscuits and witchcraft.
No. I did weird stuff when I was a kid.
I believe this. You do weird stuff now. Folk magic that I've practiced. I do like planetary herbal correspondences. I think those are cool. I'm writing a book on astrology right now, and so I've been rereading a lot of that.
Magic, though.
They did. They picked it when the moon was in a certain phase or whatever, or when they thought the rising...
That's called astronomy.
But they didn't understand it as that. Yeah. They would have considered it folk.
Levi's like taking like the most intellectual fringe of folk magic.
Okay, here's one I like. Knot magic. Knots.
That's definitely folk magic.
Like witches' ladders and nuts in the veins.
Would have been there. Me and Christian and Val went to some Welsh language.
That's not true. I love
that
Welsh.
They invented to piss the English off.
Iwerddon.
In any case, that were made from sailors' knots. They were shaped like animals. Like it was like all over the place. And it was old, but it was just in this restaurant. And I thought, oh, Val, look at this. I think. Well, when we think about our first story of witches and knots, it was sailors.
Yes. Or grannies knitting and tatting.
Storms. Yeah.
Like and like tatting and lace making and things like that. Like I've knit my whole life. I'm a big knitter. And
personally, I like to put ex-boyfriends in knots. Keep them there.
I mean, what else are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Wink and a nod. But I like
on fire.
Wow. I like stuff like that. So that's a form of folk magic I love, is this sort of knitting. It looks like we're having a few streaming issues.
Don't worry, all my ex-boyfriends are dead or crazy.
You hateful creature.
I'm kind of a witch. Anyway.
Apologies if we're having buffering issues. It could be the French Quarter internet, which is always bad. Welcome.
It's probably not a good dating badge, is it? All my ex-boyfriends are dead crazy. Want to go out?
But no, I like that. I also like puppets and dolls and magic with that. I think image magic, because that's like really where it's from. Like a lot of folk magic was based on image correspondence. And I like that. Like I like that, like it was a huge idea. Of
Levi, you've got to save me and tell everyone what a great boyfriend I'd be and how much I'd spoil them.
I don't have to save you from anything. You made this bed. You will lie in it.
I'm very generous, cute and rich. That's all that needs to be known.
Wow. And I'm hateful. I'm just hateful. If you cut me open, it's just salt water and like books, and like not fun books. There are no pictures in them. It's just
Quran
sad.
Falls out of his neck.
It's just it's all like super religious. You know what I told Fallon? She's our assistant manager here at I love her. But we were talking about aesthetics. Like everybody has an aesthetic, and I said, you know what I like to imagine lately is what is everybody's final scene in the movie? You know what I mean? Like, what is your climax in the movie? And you know what mine is? It's me in the woods, and it's some poor person, and I've got them by the hair, and I've got like a sacrificial blade to their neck, and my eyes are just blank. You know what I mean? And they're crying, and they're trying to beg, and I'm just like, why don't you understand? It's all so beautiful. You're chosen. You know what I mean? And
then Daenerys going crazy on that dragon.
See, you are. That's his ending. But my ending is I'm just sitting
there. The bells
are
going off.
And then the cops come and riddle my body with bullets in the bayou, and I just fall down to my knees, and then like some version of Ave Maria plays in the background. That's how I think it goes down for me. You're welcome.
What is that song from The Wicker Man, the original one?
Which one?
The original.
Like which
when they're burning him,
Summer is a coming in, sing cuckoo. It's just me, just losing my goddamn mind. Like it's all for you, Mama. Like
it's all for you.
It's all for you, Damien.
The only reason my exes are dead or crazy is because they were crazy enough to date me, or they're just stupid.
I love this question. Taking us back to the subject. Frank's asked, what is the source of power in folk magic? What makes it work?
Well, it doesn't usually work.
Ouch. Okay. Wow.
So here's the reality of it.
I'm not expecting that answer.
But does it surprise you?
A little.
I don't think folk magic usually works, because I think that magic works based on. I'm not one to. I think there's I don't really like using the word science behind it, but there's a mechanic behind magic working. I think folk magic works for two reasons. One, because somebody's accidentally done all the right things. Or two, because they know all the right things anyway, and they just happen to be using folk magic. I think magic can randomly work, just like I think miracles can randomly work for a Christian. Christians do get miracles. Catholics do get miracles. There have been certain people that have been purported to work miracles.
I want somebody to sing the song from the Prince of Egypt.
But it's extremely rare. It usually doesn't work. I think there's a lot of people out there doing all kinds of folk magic, burning things on their altar, slapping things on their altar, praying for their boyfriend to call them again. The phone never rings. And then they call another telephone psychic, etc., etc., etc. I don't think it usually works. Magic works for you or it doesn't. So I think that if it is working for you and you don't have the training, you might have the innate ability in the sense, like somebody was saying, it's in your blood. No, but I do think some people are more gifted at magic. Hear me out here for a second.
I think that's true.
So I think magic can be trained, but I think some people have a natural aptitude for it. And the old magical priesthoods would look for that aptitude before wasting their time on the training. But the aptitude alone, I'd rather have a really well-trained person than a person with the aptitude. But if I could get someone with the aptitude and really well-train them, great. But anyone can learn to work magic if they learn. But if those mechanics fall in place even accidentally, it's going to work. But if you don't know what you're doing and you're just being superstitious about it, which is, I think, what most people are doing, it's not going to work.
No. And also, here's what I always tell people about magic. There's many different ways about why you would want to practice magic. So, for somebody who's living under oppression, for example, actual systemic, oppression or whatever, magic might be a rebellious act against a church-infused hierarchy or whatever. And so they would judge the success of their magic based on how they get through life, how they deal with that. But for a lot of middle-class Western people who get involved with magic, I often judge their magic on whether or not it's making their life better. Are they actually a psychologically stable person who has things in their life that they want? Are they connected? The fact that you're reading into that is just your issues.
We're having fun
just
tonight.
Saying.
We're having fun tonight.
I love all these comments. It was so funny because the minute you said, it doesn't work, everybody was like, damn. They were just like...
Is it Lyndon? How do you pronounce
Lyndon, yeah.
Lyndon. I want to say, Linda, did you watch TBN?
Oh, she's talking about being a televangelist.
TBN. I think it was called TBN.
It was Trinity Broadcasting Network.
Yes, with that lady with the hair.
I prayed
was
over
Jan
that
Crouch?
chicken.
I'm Jan Crouch.
And that chicken was alive again.
Oh my God, you know her too.
I do.
I remember that. The living chicken.
Exactly.
Oh,
I had a little chicken who died.
How do you know this?
And I prayed for that chicken to be alive again. And that chicken
We are not from the same generation. He's much older than I am.
I am.
How did you?
I know everything, Brian. I
Crazy.
speak for God.
No, because your family was so crazy. They were watching reruns up there in the Appalachian, weren't they?
My family is a weird...
It was probably on video cassette.
My direct parents weren't that religious.
It was probably being put into the VHS.
Just reruns.
We taped this years ago.
WWTFD. What would Tammy Faye do?
She finally divorced him and stuff.
She died.
Did she die?
I think she's dead.
No, I don't think she is.
I think she's an angel and she's watching over
us. I don't
us.
think she's dead.
Oh my God. So somebody asked, oh, thank you, Frank. Yeah, that is how I do think it's a context-based perspective. So Frank said that was a good way to measure if magic works because I give it context. It's true. So for example, somebody can be struggling in life and I still think their magic works because they're using it for a different reason. But in the Western context,
that comes down to, comes down to your will, so there is that.
Yeah. What is your will? What are you working for?
Some people don't want anything.
Yeah.
And they shall not be disappointed.
And I also think that magic is sometimes, there's a danger in folk magic, I think, where you can get too mired in superstition.
There's a danger in magic.
But I think there's an even worse danger in folk magic when it's been divorced from any sort of training or philosophy because you get to the point where it becomes paranoia. And so I have a lot of clients when I'm a part-time reader and,
desperation.
It's desperation and paranoia. Sometimes folk magic feeds the worst aspects of human nature.
When's my man gonna call?
Exactly. Envy, paranoia, obsession, depression. It feeds a lot of really negative human qualities sometimes. If you look at what magical websites sell, often, none of it's good. Like, it's not manifestation work for anything positive. It's often reactionary magic that's based in the worst human emotions. And people
we're not saying that people can't benefit from it.
No, but it's not great.
But if you here's the whole thing. Whatever system of magic you work... So, okay, let's say this. Let's say you're interested in folk magic. Here's my advice to you. So, first of all, recognize the cultural context. Are you interested in Italian folk magic? Are you interested in, Irish folk magic? Whatever it's going to be, great. Maybe it's a way for you to connect to your heritage because your pagan heritage is long extinct.
Yeah.
All these people trying to reconstruct the Celts and the Vikings, you're not going to because we don't know. Like, you can't. You could make it up.
I don't want my religion to be cosplay.
You can make it up based on the little things we do know or what Caesar said.
Just LARPing.
But we don't know. So how are you going to do it? And would you really want to live somewhere where there might be heads on stakes? Maybe you do.
Whose heads?
I don't know. Acorns. Magical head acorns.
Whose heads?
The point is that most of you wouldn't want to actually live in those cultures. So trying to recreate the fantasy that you are is sort of a bit weird. I understand, though, that folklore is a great way to connect to that heritage in a more intermediate way.
Yeah.
In a more present way. And I like that. I think that's great. And I kind of embrace that a little bit on my own. So, fantastic. So, recognize your context. But if you're actually trying to be successful at magic, I do believe you have to have something more... You have to have a stable foundation to build that on. So it doesn't matter what you do with the herb and what you do with the root and what you do with the stick or the tree or the bark or the bone. If you don't have a stable foundation for your practice, it isn't going to work.
No, and I'm going to say something super controversial, and I don't care. Apparently, I've done that a lot tonight. I don't believe in causal magic.
On what?
I don't believe in literal causal magic. Like, I do not believe there's any property inside of a quartz crystal that has some sort of magical energy that will make something happen. Like, I don't believe that. I don't believe that certain herbs are magic. I don't believe in causal literal magic. I don't think it's a tenable belief anymore.
Sure, you don't believe that.
Yes, I am 100% sure. Magic exists in I believe that, and this is because of my initiatory training. This is because of Neoplatonism. This is because of my own personal religious beliefs. Magic only really, if there were no human beings, no conscious human beings, there would be no magic.
So in other words, you're saying it's all metaphorical symbolism.
No, I'm saying magic requires consciousness.
Yes.
That's what I mean.
We're going to get into too deep of philosophy.
I'm not going to go too far, but I'm just going to say...
If I were to call you out, I could ring you up a little bit on this.
I know
but I can't call you out.
I know.
So,
magic is...
He's being quite the devious being right now.
Magic requires consciousness.
I do believe magic requires consciousness. I do disagree with you, though, because as above, so below, I do believe that the genetic makeup of things and what makes them different can carry a different vibration. Now... To that, if you're not conscious of the vibration, that doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Anyway.
And if there were no humans to be the bridge between we are the middle world. Like, human beings in the Kabbalistic tradition, in the Neoplatonic tradition, we're the middle ground, right? There's the material world, there's the celestial world, and we exist in both. We have one foot in materiality because of our bodies. We have one foot in the celestial because of our souls. We are the conduit for all magic. We are the conduit for divinity. We are the gods experiencing the universe. That is what the mysteries have always taught. Without that, it's all just a bunch of rocks, sticks, and stones, guys. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, if there was nothing to bridge the as above, so below.
The actual mechanics that make magic work, where I will 100% agree with Levi, is that they don't require any of those things. Mm-mm. You don't require any of those things. But I do think there's energy patterns that have variations on the mundane level. That goes down to science. A lot of times how we use herbs magically is based on how we use them medicinally or don't.
Yes.
And that's built the,
Now that's different. Brian's right.
I think where you're going completely cosmic with this. And I'm saying remember the below.
But I'm saying, well, I'm trying to say it's both, that we are the conduit.
No, I get it. Without what's going on in here, none of this matters.
Exactly. Somebody, it's funny because I have two of these I want to hit on. MJ asked, can we have a live stream that's especially about philosophy? It's actually our next topic. We'll talk about that at the end, which is funny because we've had a couple people ask for that, and it's something we want to do too. But Frank has a great question. Is folk magic a type of thaumaturgy? Or are those different concepts? Almost all folk magic is just thaumaturgy. That's all it is. There's no theurgy in it. You're not trying to make yourself closer to God. You're not trying to be one with the heavens.
I think it has at times blended, and that's where it becomes a gray area. Usually not. But sometimes you do get like those very devout Catholics who are practicing folk magic and they're like super religious about it. And to them, it's like they don't, it usually is on, how could I say, it usually is with the uneducated, but it's such a blend to them. They don't see, there's a lot of those old ladies doing the folk magic in like some form of Catholicism regarding the culture. They don't see it as different than Catholicism.
Exactly.
So to them,
that would be theurgy.
They've created something, or something's been created that they perceive it that way. I do think there have been very spiritual people that practice folk magic and combine it with their spirituality, but there's no known structure for that.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Agreed.
just sort of organically happened, I think. Yeah.
So Lyndon says, a newbie question, what's thaumaturgy? Well, in historical occult terms, there's been a differentiation between thaumaturgy, which is magic to manifest a particular outcome, but that is not really invested in sort of elevating the soul. So thaumaturgy is really like, I want to make something happen. I want a new job. I want to, heal this wound. I want to, banish the mice from my house. That's thaumaturgy. Theurgy is a concept that comes from late stage Neoplatonism, theurgia in Greek, which is divine magic, which was the idea that through magical practices you could become one with God. You could elevate the soul. You could attain oneness with the heavens. It was a religious system of magic. The terms come from that period, but they've developed over time to basically thaumaturgy is magic that is just sort of based in the world, causal, trying to get an event. Theurgy is divine, right?
So for our Facebook user who doesn't have a name, I wanted to sort of highlight your question or your statement. Lighting a candle to a saint, folk magic. No, lighting a candle to a saint would be religion. Lighting a candle to a saint for a purpose would be religious magic.
Yeah.
Right? It wouldn't be witchcraft because it's not against the church, especially the Catholic Church. Maybe to some Protestants, and they have called Catholicism.
Yeah, they think it's witchcraft.
Early, when they were burning each other and what have you. But, so those are the difference. So yeah, candles are very common in folk magic, but candles are also very common in religion. So when you have a saint or something like that, you have a higher power medium that you're working with. It is religious. Mm-hmm. And that Levi and I's point is that we believe that witchcraft is not a term for magic. Although our witchcraft does have a system of magic unto itself that was developed within it for the priesthood, we don't consider the word witchcraft to be magic. We consider it to be religious magic, sort of a statement.
I think it's religious.
It's a little bit loose. We get it. It's not quite the same as saying Catholicism because it has a whole vast different context. Mm-hmm. But historically speaking, it was never used to describe magic. That's not something that happened until the 1930s. And it's happening now today. There's people in the quote unquote magical world, whatever you want to call it, who consider themselves witches, and that's all they do is cast magic.
Yeah, they don't.
Those would be the people we don't consider witches.
No, frankly. I think they're just
now
magicians.
We're not going to fight with them about it. I wouldn't go. Somebody said I'm a witch and I do this. Oh, that's fine.
I also think that this is a really complicated thing. You have people don't realize how much academic ink has been spilled trying to differentiate the difference between religion and magic. It is an incredibly
which is funny because originally it would have been a part of religion.
Exactly, it would have been. It was the same thing. This concept that a prayer is one thing, but a spell is another. It's very tricky.
I think the difference is that there's the concept of, does the power come from you or does it come from somewhere else or does it come from both? Now, in our belief, I'm comfortable saying we believe it comes from both.
Yep.
You and other places and other things. But we do think it requires both. We think it requires other to really be effective. So we think we do have a hand in it, but some people like to think it all comes from them, I guess. And that's then they can feel like they don't. There are magical practices that function that way now, but I believe originally, even what we now call ceremonial magic comes from religious priesthoods. I really believe that. I think all the grimoires and all that comes from what the Egyptians wrote down and the Greeks and the Romans, and there you go.
And also, I'm going to be really honest, and it's something I've said on this podcast a lot. I probably am a little bit of an odd duck in the.
I don't know what that is.
In the magical community. Oh, it's from TikTok.
Darling, I've just recently been exposed to TikTok, and if it's anything like Instagram, probably.
Yeah, somebody's asking about TikTok.
I don't know who they are.
Yeah, kind of.
I don't know who they are.
They are.
I was going to say, parlay into my thing. Don't forget your thought, because I will forget this. I was going to say earlier, most of what I see of folk magic now is people's pictures of their altars on Instagram.
I know, it's
here I am burning a candle. Here's my altar and my little bell. I'm so magical. Like me, be my fan. That makes me important. Sorry, getting on a bit of a different thing, but folk magic doesn't mean anything once taken out of its cultural context. Does that make sense?
Michael,
what you were saying, go ahead.
Yes, I'm going to go back to my thought for a second, but Michael said the holy water recipe for the church still comes from Solomon. That's a
Levi once threw holy water on me.
I did, at a church in central Portugal.
I still haven't forgiven him.
That's a chicken or egg situation, really, there. And also,
I didn't like it.
That
place smelled like death.
I didn't like that church either. It did not have a good spiritual vibe to it.
You could smell the dead bodies.
Yeah, I don't really like that. I didn't like that church either. Some churches, Notre Dame, for example, is one of the most spiritual places I've ever been, but that's because it's on an old spiritual place and it's a place of goddess worship, really.
I'm on Instagram, but you don't, I might post a picture of me in Karnak or at the altar in Philae in Egypt, but maybe my nipples in a pool. But come on, some of this has just gotten redundant. Yes, we know you burn incense. We know you've got a little candle and you've got a little statue.
Now you're just getting hateful.
It's just annoying.
You're just getting hateful.
It's becoming so redundant, or it's just
It is. I don't know what this is, but
I'm a witch.
Are you okay, sweetie?
It's just. I think that I don't like the idea of the craft being completely superficial.
Agreed. But what my definitive...
Not saying it can't be a little bit.
Not to forget my thought.
Look at Levi, for instance.
What is
completely superficial?
Yeah, wholly. You know what? No, I've been down this road so many times on this channel, and I think I'm just repeating myself. Like, I don't know how many more times I can say to people.
Everyone.
I do. Who ask me all these questions, and people just have totally.
Hey, no one's asked about transsexuals tonight. Come on, someone throw it out. Oh, transgenders.
Thank you. Have completely bought hook, line, and sinker this idea that that religion is not our thing, that they've hook, line, and sinker bought this and ceded all the ground to religious fanatics. I will cede no damn ground. I'm going to talk about faith. I'm going to talk about religion. I'm going to talk about believing in God. I'm not ceding that ground to Christianity. The old mystery cults believed in it. Witchcraft believes in it. I will not cede this territory.
The difference between us and Christianity is our gods are real.
Their gods are real too.
Their gods are dead.
There's only one God. There's only one God.
And they said he died.
He did.
They said he's going to come back, but it keeps not happening. Yeah, but ours, that's not entirely true.
He dies, though.
He dies for a second.
He dies, look at him, for a minute.
He dies like the corn. They said their God's going to come back a long time ago.
That's true. But remember,
we said our God's going to come back in the spring, and he always does.
So far.
Yes. The world will end someday.
Let's all cross your fingers. But anyway, so back to some of the questions, because we have gotten away from it.
Some gods don't come back, though. They die on Instagram.
Michael Krell said Jehovah had some issues. Didn't he, though? He needed a woman.
He had one once.
Asherah. Yeah, Asherah, the queen.
I always say Asherah.
But
you should know how to say it right, Levi. You're Jewish. It's Asherah.
I'm not Jewish. Everybody, that's my thing. Asherah. So have
Shira. Shira is from Masters of the Universe. Asherah.
What is happening right now? I feel like...
By the honor of Grayskull.
So everybody, it's been great tonight.
I totally have watched that whole cartoon.
So people are talking a little bit about I really do think that folk magic is part of most people's practice if you're in the magical community on some level.
Or has been. When I was younger, I did a lot of folk magic. I just, as time's gone on, I just find myself less drawn to it, but it still pops up. you know.
Yeah, but it's a part of all the traditions. Like, you know, everything sort of has that. You're going to have ancestral, you know, teachings, whatever that got preserved.
In our materials, we've got tons of Gardnerians and Alexandrians. Okay, I will say this. I'm going to spill a little tea without giving any details, obviously. So everything the traditional witchcraft people do, we have. You know, or we invented, you know, except the stang, because that word was invented by Robert Cochrane, and we don't.
It also has almost no historical connotation.
Well, it doesn't have any. Where it does have one is that it used to be that bale hooks for hay were two-pronged, and two prongs were very popular in the English countryside for baling
but there's
straw, and so there were woodcuts of people flying around on those, like brooms and other agricultural tools.
Yeah.
There's no, actually, stong is the only word that's close to it, and we don't even know if it's got prongs.
That's another thing that we haven't mentioned that I think is important, you know.
But all the other,
some folk magic's just made up.
Hang yarrow over, well, it's all made up. Hang yarrow over your bed and you'll dream of your lover. Yes, you know, everyone has that. We all read about it too. You know, it's.
But I do say, like, I keep alive certain traditions because of their beauty, or because, like, I do think that, like, a magical view of the world or a spiritual view of the world can be a healthy alternative to soulless materialism. So, like, yes, lavender for this, or basil for this, or keep coriander seeds under the, you know, or a colander under the bed so you won't have nightmares and the ghosts have to pass through all the holes. You know, all these old legends or whatever, or fairy legends. I like all that because I do think it's nice to have a magical worldview, because I think, like I said, it is an antidote to soulless.
13 stones, baptize them in his name, and boil them till the water evaporates and all his hair will fall out.
It happened to me. But
your hair was gone before I met you.
You're such a hateful person.
Yes, but I'm just saying I didn't have anything to do with it.
No, my hair has a natural wave, and that wave is bye. But no, I do think that's why I do it. I keep it alive because I want
to make something dark and spooky.
I did. I want to live in that world of beauty. I want to live in that world of the gods. I don't want to live in the world of soulless, late-stage capitalist consumerism. So, like, that's fine. What you cannot do, though, if you want to be an initiate, if you want to be somebody who's on the right path, is to allow this to turn into pure, unadulterated, crazy paranoia, which is what happens all the time with people. My clients do this all the time. They're working against me. You can just see it on them.
Are you going to lose clients by saying this?
I don't care. If you're that kind of client, I don't want you. But, like, people...
I used to have some real
people
crazy
get
people
crazy. I mean, to the level where it's just like, okay, maybe you do need a dose. Like, honey, just watch some Golden Girls reruns and take a break, eat some cheese or something. Like, the neighbors are not peeing in jars. I mean, like, it's calm down, you know. Find balance. Find balance.
Somebody thought neighbors were peeing in jars.
Oh, please.
Like making witches'
or
bottles.
coffin. Yeah, witches' bottles, coffin boxes.
Well, witches' bottles are for protection. They're not to hurt anyone.
Not in the modern world, but
no, that's really well known.
Yeah, they hang them. But nowadays, there's a whole tradition like where you see.
Well, then someone made that up.
They did.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my point. My point is I live in a magical world. My house has a horseshoe above the door. My house has an altar to the Virgin Mary. My house has rosaries hanging on the walls. My house has roses growing in the in the back. I do all kinds of things like that.
My house has things too.
Yeah, I wear talismans. Like I get it. I love it. It's beautiful. What I'm not going to do, though, is like lose my mind to it. I'm not going to sacrifice my consciousness.
What are we wearing today? Is this just fashion?
It's a white serpent.
Yeah, but it means it's just a fashion piece.
Mm-hmm. My friend Carrie bought it for me. It's a white serpent.
Carrie hasn't bought me anything.
Yeah. It's a white serpent, which I really like. Yeah, the serpent beguiled me.
It's my serpent, Carrie.
But yeah, just that's my problem with folk magic.
She bought stuff.
I think one of the reasons I sometimes might seem a little harsh about it is I think it's because I'm a reader, and the longer I do this, the more I see
you are connected with people. It's kind of like me with the. I'm starting to get a little bit jaded with the transsexual conversation. Transgendered. It's sort of annoying, you guys. Like trying to keep up with this politically correct thing, because it does change all the time.
We're never good. Why is this coming up in a conversation? I knew it
because no one else brought it up, so
we have to.
But yeah, it's these same conversations come up all the time. That's what I'm kind of getting at. And so sometimes you get a bit jaded out of it, And we live in New Orleans, so we are very much annotated with things we're not even involved in.
It does get repetitive after a while. If all that somebody's witchcraft is, or all their magic is paranoia and just constant unending negativity, all they do is curse. And here's what I always think. The lady always protests too much. Like every single person I know is like, I don't curse all the time, but I know how to curse. I know how to curse, and I'm going to do the curse. It's like all you talk about. If that's all you talk about, it's just hilarious to me. It's like that one person. You know what it reminds me of? It's people who are obsessed with cursing are like drunks who have not realized they're drunks. Like all they do is talk about it. I don't have a problem. I don't know why you saying I don't have a problem. I can stop whenever I want.
What
I don't
about people who talk out of two sides of their mouth?
Same thing, right?
You know, I get really frustrated with people. I've actually seen it quite recently. People who have had one very strong opinion, and then all of a sudden they shift completely to the other opinion. You know, and these are public personas. You know, it happens quite a lot because they're trying. Shouldn't speak ill of the dead, so I'm not going to name names.
Yeah, don't.
I know you do. So some authors who are no longer with us in this world, you know, at one point in time, we're like, oh, I'm Gartenarian. And then when that sort of was called out as, no, you're not Gartenarian. Then it was, oh, now I'm hereditary. And then it became all about folk magic.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it was the tradition they created as folk magic. There are individuals who are doing nothing more but following trends.
Yeah.
It's not really their practice. They're not really doing it. They're just following trends. Levi are initiatory witches. We believe in reincarnation. We're not anything else. We're not trying to worship the devil. We're not trying to be Kabbalists. We're not trying to, I mean, we might, you know, our devil, but, you know, the point is that we are really one thing. And that's what I advise you to look for in any teacher, somebody who's one thing and they've been consistent about it. If they're jumping all over the place and don't know where their head is, they're not suitable to teach. They're not suitable to have a conversation. They're not suitable to represent. The words for Rosie, what are you for? What are you for?
Exactly.
You know, what are you for? You know, usually nothing except themselves.
Exactly. And I don't know. I just feel like that's my one thing is like I knew I would bring this up in a topic about folk magic, and it's because I've been a reader for so long. You know, I never used to see it this bad, but like there is something about, and it's because it's become a trend. Brian's right. It's all trends. And the trend right now is negative magic. The trend is cursing. And the reason is it's reaction against the love and light.
I think it's folk magic right now.
It is, and it's a reaction against Doreen Virtue and the angels, and it was all love and light.
It was like all roadkill.
And the secret and all that. And so I understand why there is a pendulum swing the other way. But like, let me ask you a question. All these people who hate the love and light people and the neo-Wiccans or whatever.
Who hates love, who hates light.
Exactly. What is the worst you're going to become? The worst you're going to become if you go down the love and light path too far is you're going to be a little bit of a water-headed, deluded fool. Okay, that's not the end of the world.
But are you happy?
But maybe you're happy. You know what? Shit. Maybe you smoke a spliff, you watch a little bit of some hippie shit on Gaia, and you live your life. Good for you, sugar. But like, if you go down the other one too far, the cursing and black magic and devil worship
dead animal
and dead animals and shit, that ends somewhere else. I would rather deal with the happy, deluded fools from the 90s who used to wear fairy wings or whatever. 10 out of 1.
Some of them still do.
God bless them. I would rather deal with that and the people who go to yoga once a week and think that makes them religious. Then I would rather deal with that than I would deal with people who worship evil and who obsess about cruelty and violence and who are just over jerking off because of how mean they can be. I'm like, this is boring. Like you're both boring, but I would rather have the former way more. Like 100%.
Well, I think it's, you know, if you're talking about, you know, playing with the universe, manipulating the universe, it does take a certain amount of, this is what's popular. What's popular is whatever makes you instant. Because we live in a fast food society.
Yeah.
So whatever makes you instant is or whatever's easy is what's popular. And what's popular is I feel this way. I identify this way. This is my practice. No one's going to tell me what to do, yada, yada, yada. Nothing wrong with that sort of ideology. It's a bit teenage in a sense. You don't get anywhere in life with that philosophy. Any person of any age will tell you that. If you want an education, you're going to have to go through the ropes. If you want certain careers, you're going to have to go through the ropes. That's just real life. You know, you don't get to just be like, I'm so fabulous. Magic is no different. I've often said, I don't want to associate with somebody who's going to pull a gun out and shoot someone any more than I want to associate with somebody who's going to kill them with a black candle, if they actually could, or even if they want to, because it's the same person, right? So the same person who wants to kill with one way is the same person who wants to kill with another way, if they truly want that.
Yeah.
And if they're just expressing their anger, there's something a bit wrong anyway. I don't want to be around those kinds of people. So ask yourself who it is you want to be, what is it you're doing. So if you're actually entering into the realms of magic and you think you've got no consequences to that because you are the omnipotent one, like you're the sinner, there's no god or goddess for you to answer to, you're the sinner of all things. Well, even then I'm going to ask you, what do you want the sinner of all things to be? Because in the end, you will make your own heaven and you will make your own hell. Yeah. You know, regardless of what you think. And in truth, there's going to be a cop on that freeway, whether you like it or not. And they will pull you over if you're going too fast. You know, so there's
And don't you honestly just get bored with it? With like this endless cruelty, this endless obsession with petty magic? I mean, it's so tiresome.
Johnny, I've always despised Scott Cunningham. It's not really a secret. So Scott Cunningham, I've told the story before when I did read his first book. And maybe it's how I came into what books I had read first. You know, I'd read Buckland's book, I'd read the Farrars before I ever came across Scott Cunningham. So I already had witchcraft with a little bit more meat on its bones, and with it wasn't Llewellyn-fied, 90s Llewellyn-fied the way that book was. Now that book was extremely profitable and successful. So from a business venue, I mean, it really served its purpose. And a lot of people did go on to explore deeper things because of that book. So the craft will use anyone to survive, I guess they say. But yeah, I didn't like that book for the same reason I don't like a lot of what's going on today. It is a form of cultural appropriation, because what people don't want to acknowledge is the fact that there is a religion of witchcraft, you know, and they do a lot of things to try to make themselves feel comfortable with this. It is partially a modern construct, obviously, but it does exist, and it's now working towards 100 years of existing. You know, it's working on that. It's got some sort of continuity to it. This is all sort of cultural appropriation, and that book was just the basis of it all. It was, I'm not involved in this. Let me take what I can find that other people did and say everything they did is BS, and you can all do it on your own the way I'm saying you can, even though I don't have the credentials, and I'm going to sell a lot of books. The man was a Hawaiian shaman. Like, that was his big thing most of his walk. I actually saw a whole thing about it. He was not ever initiated into any substantial witchcraft tradition. Now, later on, Llewellyn's group apparently initiated him, because Llewellyn was an initiate of Lady Sheba's, who, as most of us know, was a huge, big fraud. So there you go. There's the whole story. Cunningham and Llewellyn were close. But that book was extremely successful, and I suppose the craft did use it to bring a lot of good people to the craft. But yeah, it's complete bollocks, because it's telling people and giving people, and it created a genre of what I now call the Park Pagan movement. Yeah. You know, it's people who are like, well, I'm Wiccan, you know, and it's created this whole like weird dichotomy that no one can get out of. Because you've got people telling the initiates they're Wiccans, or Wicca. You know, Gardner invented Wicca. He invented, you know, that's the religion. This is witchcraft. It's a magical practice. The religion is Wicca. Gardner invented it. That's such a You've got the initiates going, we never said that. You got this all from us. You know, and then you've got people who are like, I'm Wiccan, but I don't practice magic. And I don't need to be initiated either. You know, you've got like this whole dichotomy of different people using these labels in different ways. So all I can revert back to is how we originally used them, which is that witch and Wicca, which is actually pronounced witcha, W-I-C-C-A for male, and W-I-C-C-E for female.
It's the hill upon which people die.
Old children. English. No, I'm going to change the world by educating it. You're a teacher. You should believe it's possible. These are the words. The old word for witch is witch. Wicca is not even pronounced right. It's not a different word. It's not a different practice. It's Old English for the English word witch. That's it. And that's all we ever said it was in all the original books. That's all they said. This is Saxon, Old English, Anglo-Saxon for the word witch. That's what we taught all of you. And then people like him came along. And then next thing we know, we got all these fools on YouTube and Instagram saying, I like candles. What I do is witchcraft. Some people make it a whole thing. But then what they don't do is actually properly educate what that whole thing is. So then anyone who it strikes their fancy, I think what happened is some of the American Gardnerians wanted to reclaim the word Wicca like Haitian voodoo. Like initiates, we could own this word.
Yeah.
We can't own the word witch anymore, so we
could own the word Wicca. Yeah.
I'll own both the words, thank you very much, because there's a real history. I don't care if you use it. I don't care what word you use. But I know the history of the word, and that's what I educate on. And I kind of got off the
I'm letting it happen. I'm literally just like,
And that's what we think about folk magic.
How many times? I'm just sitting here like, the Wicca with the two.
And that's what a folk magician does.
But no.
Words are magic.
That's true.
So there you go.
But no, that is, I think we're getting close to the end.
Put a spell on you.
And I think that's interesting to end on. It's not a bad place. Folk magic is not a bad thing. Like it is simply the magic of the people. That is, magic.
And all magical people do. Well, not all magical people do
Most
folk magic,
do.
but there are some who practice pure occultism, but there's something they do that could be classified. For instance, I'll give you a couple things. Let's do the last few minutes about folk magic things we've learned.
Yeah.
So one thing I learned very recently was on my trip to Egypt. We had a tour guide who was wonderful. She's supposed to be at Hexfest next year, hopefully in person. Very wonderful. And, I don't know what her real beliefs are. She said she follows the laws of Maat, but she was very knowledgeable. One of the things she taught us was that salt water is still used in Egypt. They will mix salt with water to sprinkle it around their homes to get rid of evil spirits. And they even use salt water sprinkling it over newborn babies. Even Muslims in Egypt do this to this day, but it's an Egyptian custom. This is so magic in so many magical practices, isn't it? The fact that it's still being carried on by the local Egyptian, populace, that's what folk magic is. It's this old memory. That came from the temple priests. It's recorded. Now, they put hyssop in it, because the Egyptians did salt water with hyssop in it. Maybe it was Nile water with hyssop in it. But, that magical thing, we get it from the Key of Solomon. Salt water and hyssop. That's the holy water.
The asperger.
And it comes from Egypt. All that grimoire stuff, I know it's been Judeo-Christianified, but it comes from Egypt. It comes from the Greco-Romans. They're the ones who wrote all the magic down, and the
Hermeticism,
the early Christians and the early Jews were very much exposed to Alexandria, Egypt. It was a big hub for both Christianity and the Jewish movement. So I'm not wrong on that, am I?
Well, the Jews are older, obviously, than Alexandria.
Well, I'm not saying
there was a massive Jewish community in
Alexandria. The
Alexandria.
movement of what could be Jewish occultism
was in Alexandria.
Definitely been exposed to that.
Well, it was all mixed. The Greek magical papyri have prayers to the angels.
The Jews were exposed with Greco-Roman Egyptian stuff, is what I'm basically saying.
And it's all true. I mean, in the beginning, Hermetic magic had tons of Christian and Jewish things.
The Jews stoned me in the street.
I remember that story, yeah. But Jews in Alexandria, you'll read them using, this complex angelic magic or whatever, and it all stems from the same sort of places. Brian's right. There are currents that exist in all of it. But that's the whole thing, guys, about folk magic, since we're nearing the end, is it's not good, it's not bad, it's just memory, magical memory.
It's the magic of the people.
Magic of the people. Yes. It's the magic of memory.
Oral.
Magic of place.
And in a small sense, yes, the magic that the witches were doing, the pre-Christian witches, whatever they were called, were doing, some of that memory is retained in folk magic. We recognize that. But it's not enough to decipher. Fortunately, a lot of cultures wrote a lot down. The Egyptians wrote a lot down. The Greeks and the Romans wrote a lot down. All of the history that we are practicing today, as far as how we function in magic, was written down by these people, using my words, written down by these people.
Wicca.
Wicca.
I'm just going to start.
Wicca. My mama was a Wiccan in Appalachia.
None of that's right. Appalachia.
She used to put butter in a jar.
If I have
And
to
if
say
a
Witcher,
dead bird fell on the window, we ran out of the house.
yeah, I can't. If we should go. Listen. Well, we are at the end anyway.
He won't do the accent.
I will not do the accent.
Are you ashamed of your folklore?
I am not ashamed of
You
my
must
past.
be, because you won't do it.
No.
Tell us what they sound like. Though.
No, I'm not going to do this.
He's hidden from it his whole life.
I have not. I'm very connected to my.
What do they call it?
history.
No, it's not. That's called self-hatred.
Self-loathing Appalachian.
Self-loathing.
No,
He's
I'm
ashamed of it.
I'm not ashamed of it.
Well, this young boy who came from a place of poverty that didn't even have any butter.
That's not true. There's plenty of butter.
I thought you told me they didn't really have butter.
They have butter.
I thought you said it was mostly lard.
Oh, they use lard. No, they all had butter. They just didn't use oil. They used lard.
Oh, was that what it was?
So that's always what I can tell when somebody's
didn't have
lying in
oil.
Appalachian books, when they're like, my granny used to make things out of vegetable. Really? Because most poor people in Appalachia didn't have that. They had lard, but okay.
See, he was so poor they didn't even have vegetable oil.
Okay, that's not
But
true.
somehow
I
he
didn't
climbed out of that, got himself a great education, and became a language teacher. And now he's too ashamed to tell us how he used to really talk.
That's true. I never had it.
But he's also a Witcher man now. So
I'm a Witcher man. That's true. So we're going to end our show today.
Yes.
But next topic.
We got a bit goofy. It's all
I
right.
loved it. Next week we're going to be here and we're going to be talking about witchcraft and monotheism, and sort of like the religion, the
It'll be
theism
a bit
of
more
witchcraft.
philosophical.
Philosophize.
We'll see where it goes.
But yeah, we're going to talk about philosophy, theism, the gods, the one God. There's only one God. There is no God but God. And woman is the messenger of God. But it's going to get weird. But it's been a great chat, guys. We will see you next time.
That is really quite funny. Instagram and Insta witches really is the same thing, isn't it?
We're still on. We're still on. It's been great.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody. I will see you all later. It's been fun.